later in the day with them, with the machine on my head, and then they pulling out because it got actually lodged. It was, he said, under microscope, it was like a plastic disc, and it got lodged side into my eyeball.
Glad you're doing well. Just over here cringing.
Professional injury.
The pain, crazy. My wife was out of town, so I drove myself to the ER. They put some like anesthetic into my eye. Immediately the pain was gone. Then they took it out, and they told me to go to the drugstore to get drugs. By the time I was in the drugstore, I couldn't drive on the highway home.
Alrighty, so which order?
On roads.
Scroll from the bottom. We have a bunch of the Cindy things, but we should talk with Eric Erhardt. When are we gonna tackle them together?
Yeah, we should probably do like an overall thing with these guys, because I think it makes more sense.
For 2.1. So let's start. We have 3 networking things, which are I shouldn't say simple, but yeah, almost simple.
You think we can do
the bottom one, number 4 from bottom, and then 1 second from the top or third from the top. They're very basically I think no, even higher up.
Oh.
Sorry. Yep.
This one?
Yep. If you want to. I look at the namings, they seem pretty straightforward. The only difference or advice might be the I'm a teapot versus the third from the top on the WinRT status is I'm used. So the casing is different if anyone cares.
How
We should spell it out. I am used.
It's probably easy to read, yeah.
We copy-pasted what's actually in WinRT and what's actually as well on Wikipedia. It's called capital I, capital M, space used.
And the Wikipedia article is about WinRT APIs. Wikipedia article about WinRT APIs.
Wikipedia about, yeah, something like that.
Didn't know that you were that popular, that we have a Wikipedia article about WinRT.
Because IM is instance manipulation.
Where's my...
So it is an actual review.
Here you go.
Yeah.
So it's just a bunch of enum values.
It's sitting there for 2 years and 3 months, so it's kind of embarrassing.
Yeah, so the casing isn't inconsistent. HTTP 226 is IM, which is instance manipulation used, and HTTP 416 is I'm, as in I am, a teapot.
Casing.
Well, IM is not an acronym.
Okay.
In 226 it is.
Yeah.
It's instance manipulation used, IM used.
Yeah, but not in 418.
In 418 it's the contraction I'm without the apostrophe.
In that case, I think it's shitty, but it's correct.
Didn't you write the guidelines for stuff?
Yes, but not about I am used.
No, but I thought you had a guideline that said acronyms less than 3 syllables were always up, or less than 3 letters were always up.
You know what this really is about, right?
Yeah.
So somebody took offense that I always specialize this case with lowercase o. Like if we should not have done that.
I just wanted an excuse to say I learned it from watching you.
All right.
Well, I had to do research on the difference between abbreviations, shortenings, and there's something else. There's whole taxonomy of these things if you study linguistic books. Otherwise, none of the guidelines would make sense. But then I read the thing, and I created a rationale. after the fact.
Right. So here we go.
Over here, something similar. We are adding constant strings for application JSON, application XML.
You never had that?
No, we have text/XML. We researched, or Peter Smith researched a bunch of things that might be useful. The application JSON is actually useful because there's on the Stack Overflow question, there's confusion what should be used, and there are like 4 or 5 variations. This is the right one based on, I believe, RFC or something. So
Isn't there actually such a thing as a correct MIME type?
Well, there are MIME types dictated by RFCs.
Yeah. So
and then there's a gazillion of others that people use. So
Yeah.
I always had the impression that MIME types are similar
Right,
to
right.
bumper stickers, like whatever you feel like it.
But sometimes servers are kind of finicky about what they accept.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
Yeah, like the cryptographic timestamping that says this will be the MIME type of the request, and
I mean, unless somebody has an objection. Like, spelled correctly, it seems to be in the right spot. Not much to argue about.
Do we expose that to application type in core? The type called application?
Well, it's
It's a nested.
It's basically MediaTypeNames.Application dot. So, given that the type already exists, I didn't feel like.
No, I was just curious. I was surprised we said that.
and this one, switching the default to version 2.0, and when we started discussing that, we figured out that let's do a default, and basically, let's switch it to kind of not system default, but the implementation default. I'm gonna be the list for us.
Every time we had something that floats like this, it breaks people.
Yes, it might.
It will.
But so we're gonna change to 2.0 anyway, right? So we're gonna break people. So the question is if that we want to really stop changing that on a regular basis and saying like this is what's gonna.
What I would do is I would change the value from the name from default to highest available or something, because default is a policy, right? This is like if you just say highest available, I mean that is always true, but that may not be the default, right?
Well, but it's not clear whether it's going to be true. So imagine a new version is released, but we don't change the implementation APIs that take this thing.
Yeah, highest
So
available
label is
means
supported.
highest available you're supporting, right? Like highest available doesn't mean like the highest.
Experimental support only, right? So you're not gonna roll.
so I mean this is easy for core. The question is for framework, are we going to do the once we've added it and it is locked to a thing that it's locked to a thing? Or are we actually going to let it move? In which case, as Wes said, it always bites us.
No, because I think like we could still say on desktop the default version is let's say 1.1, right, hardwired. But there's a constructor that takes an HTTP version, and if the customer says I want the highest available, we should let people do that.
At that point, should this actually reflect the highest available version though, and not be int max?
Well, to me, like the problem is it's a sentinel, right? I told you there's no such thing as int max value as a version. Right?
Well, this is static read-only, not const.
Yeah. So you could change it.
So they will pull the value, and then they will get whatever the assembly says.
Maybe.
I mean, are there scenarios in which someone would want to query what the highest supported version is for any given framework?
Well, I'm more thinking like how the
Not
implementation
this.
would
This
work,
is not
right?
the right API for that.
Like, I mean, you could argue that instead of having a property, we just make a method, like get highest available. But then I'm not sure we can do that because it depends on where HTTP version the type ships and where the implementation lives, right? So let's imagine the HTTP version is a thing that ships inbox and we can't change it, but then there is an out-of-band HTTP client or something, and then you can accept the HTTP version. If you just get a sentinel value, you can honor it. If the API is forced to produce it, then you're screwed.
So how do we imagine people using this API? Like, is it even like, shouldn't people be explicit what version they want?
There's overload, or I think it's a property, I believe. But in general, they don't set it. And we have defaults right now. We default to 1.1. So the point is like, hey, 1.1 is pretty old, 2.0 is faster, so let's switch it to 2.0. And with that, we want to give as well people opportunity to say, when they set it explicitly, to say like, yeah, if you don't care, you really want the latest, greatest, like pass there the default. Tell us like, use whatever we decide is best.
Or they can just check if some specific version is already supported already or not before using it, right?
But we've never had this problem before because HTTP 1.1 predates .NET framework.
Yeah, I think, I mean, HTTP versions are not, like, coming out like crazy, generally speaking, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's,
Or we're highest supported instead of highest available.
that would work too.
It's a bit.
I mean, to me, like, it's really, I just don't like the word default because it implies that this is the policy, which we may not be able to support.
Which actually, well, on .NET Core it's gonna be the policy, yeah.
But
But
as
not
Jeremy
probably,
said,
not
like,
probably on .NET Framework. Like changing defaults over there is like, yeah.
I can just see people trying to do, if highest supported is 2.0, then do something, otherwise fall back. Then 3.0 is released and then the code doesn't work.
Well, that's why say max forever.
We still be set.
It's you pass it to the library and it tells it just do whatever you want to do.
And then you cannot use it to query.
Yeah. You'd have to do something with it and ask back, what did you actually do?
I have to say, I don't mind this API, but I'm a bit skeptical.
Yeah.
It cannot be used for query, and if we have existing APIs that return versions. I understand that they need to change because we want to move to 2.0, but if I explicitly call some API and I pass in a value, I think I would, I don't understand what would be the scenario for, I don't care, just give me the highest.
So if we want, so for a query type thing, it would need to live not as a static. Here, it would need to live on the implementation type, so it would need to live on HTTP client or HTTP client
Probably
or whatever.
handler because
The handler, whatever in the layer actually does the work, because that's what would actually know what the best fit it supports is. And so maybe that's a better answer.
But maybe, as I said, I don't feel super, possibly there are scenarios, it's just hard for me to think.
It would be better if you have a supported version and you check for some specific version is supported.
Well, the Sentinel being called best supported, but the difficulty could be that you could be in the state where you think 2.0 is working, but you're not confident. So 2.0 would work if someone passed it in, but otherwise you're going to say 1.1 is your best supported, and people want it. The trouble is, at some point, we're making an opinion.
And also, the highest supported, let's say it's 2.0, you compare it to the highest supported, and it doesn't compare to equals. Isn't it weird?
Yeah, it would be weird, yes.
And that's the current behavior,
That's right.
as in this proposal.
Well, that'd be like comparing, is this timeout bigger than timeout.infinite? It's yes. It's oh, okay. Then I've exceeded my timeout. It's no, timeout.infinite's -1. It's both greater than and less than all other values.
One thing that is problematic with having Sentinel values is that people would probably end up comparing the Sentinel values themselves. They're saying some things like HTTP version highest supported equals HTTP version 2.0, and that will never be true, right? So we probably should rename it at least to something like use highest or something to make sure that it's an instruction rather than an actual version number. But maybe exposing a Sentinel value itself is not a good idea. We should instead.
Maybe it's a different overload that doesn't take the version on.
Yeah, I don't know. Do we know how this looks like? If it's a structure somewhere, then it may be hard to do. But
What was the question again?
the question is, so imagine instead of having this API here at all, whatever takes the version right now offers a different property that's basically instead of having a version, you just say, there's another thing you can say, use highest equals true or something.
Or we take the thing that takes a version and make an overload that takes a nullable version, and null means do whatever you want.
Right. I could imagine there's little layers that don't care, right? The thing that uses the HTTP client and doesn't actually customize anything. The best possible experience for their consumers.
Nope. They just want the thing that works.
Yeah. What did 2.0 actually add in HTTP? What was the most?
They rewrote it. It has nothing in common with 1.0.
Okay, so it's just better footprint-wise, or like smaller protocol or whatever.
It's binary instead of text.
Oh, welcome to the 21st century, I guess.
Yeah.
Alright, so then...
Like it still has headers and content. And
maybe hypertext.
it assumes at some point that you had a connection of some sort.
Whether it's... is highest supported.
Yeah, except use highest supported sounds like, it only looks good on the call side. It doesn't look good when you look at the class. It has static fields, HTTP 1, 1.1, 2.0. Use highest supported. 3 nouns or noun phrases and 1 verb.
Yeah, it feels.
So to me, my main for the person who filed it is to show APIs that would consume it, and kind of some common scenarios, like why would you even pass it to some API? Like, doesn't the API have a default, or should it have a default?
I can spell the word nonsensical. I guess there's... Yeah, here we go. I know we should probably remove one of the nons, otherwise it becomes nonsensical. Changing the APIs that take a version. Yeah, I don't know what else we could do. I mean, these are really the only 2 options.
Can you add a comment to provide code samples of usage, and like APIs that would consume it?
Alright.
To the bottom.
Can we do the string like first?
The 2 ones first, so...
There we go. Let's just try to walk them all.
purposes.
Is this really the right API? Like, I mean, shouldn't we literally just give you like an int back or something, or a long?
So there actually is an API already that gives you an int back, because it's basically comparative, but it produces bad code.
No, compared to compares the values.
Yeah. Well, so there's an API that basically takes right minus left and returns a difference. That already exists. However, that incurs operations that you don't necessarily want to perform in hot code paths, and this is meant for hot code paths.
I think Imo was just asking, can I get an integer representation of the address and just...
No. So there is a 2-pointer, however, you can't do that because the garbage collector
moved it.
This around and now the pointer's bad.
So why?
A compare for like an actual less than greater than?
That's actually a good point. Yeah.
You would, so what would it be, like less than ref?
Yeah, I mean like is above means that if the first above the second, right? Which is greater than the second.
Yeah, but what would that look like when you're writing the code?
Like our compare methods. Compare to takes 2 refs and returns an int. If it's -1,
So
the left one...
Here's the thing. Like I actually created that as the very first idea here. The problem is that is incurring overhead in hot code paths. What happens is you have this method which returns -1, 0, or 1. Now you have another comparison after that because all you really cared about was if one was less than the other. So now you actually have 2 different.
No, it would be just one.
Because you just return the pointer of right minus the pointer of left.
Which we already have an API for that, and I tested it, and it gives bad performance in hot code paths. The reason being that it incurs an arithmetic operation, where we really just want a direct comparison.
So what does the
Okay,
thing then
so
do?
this is the LT being more expensive than sub and test.
Yeah.
Okay. There, LT is less expensive.
Yeah.
So the implementation, how you implement it, like is about what you will do inside?
It's written in IL. It's just a simple comparison, like load arg1 or load arg0, load arg1, compared less than.
So, I mean, doesn't the same argument of you can't call 2-pointer because it could mean that this API is effectively useless?
No, because when the CLR detects that the 2 arguments are actually references rather than pointers, it makes sure that they're both correct as far as GC goes before the comparison takes place.
Yes, but as soon as it returns back to your function, compaction could move them to not have that same relationship. So by the time you get the answer, it could be false, or it could be wrong.
It could be, however, as far as for the particular scenarios where we're using this, it's actually okay. Because one scenario we know for a fact that we're working with the same buffer, we just want to know whether we've gone past the midpoint of the buffer. This is the array.reverse example, basically, where you have one pointer going from the beginning, one pointer going from the end. Eventually they'll meet and pass each other, and this is a way to tell if they pass each other. The other one is used as a span.copy2 implementation, and the same thing there. Like as long as each individual comparison is correct as far as GC is concerned, then everything's okay. I mean, it is a really low-level API right for abuse.
I mean, like the discussion I just skimmed over, like the naming discussion. I think that honestly, like all the other names have the same problem.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, if you say is less than value 1, if you read it like that, it still gives you the wrong idea of what the API does.
Well, it would be ref value 1 and ref value 2.
Well, that's not the point. The point that Eddie made was, if you read it like this, basically what ends up happening is you say if is below left, but like it's basically left is below right, right? And like but less than or is greater than, like all the compare to methods have the same problem. Basically, you have to in your head imagine this as an infix operator.
Well, except I don't think we use in the framework terminology below and above. We use less than and greater than.
Yeah,
that seems.
Sure,
So,
but like I mean,
They are synonyms, and why would we not stick
you have to
to it?
convey that what you're comparing is the address, not the value they're pointing to.
And below and above actually is the terminology that x86 uses for that.
Well, that one I care less about because I mean we can just make whatever we think. I mean we could also call it like is memory below or something, or isn't below, or has lower address or something. But
You can also just put the name address and the name of the method.
Yeah.
too.
yeah,
Which way is above?
unsafe address is below.
Above is a higher,
That wouldn't be
higher
horrible.
unsigned address. Okay. Closer to the front. Addresses.
Are we okay with that then?
Or allow us to put inline IL in C# functions. And I'll resend this request.
That's what the intrinsics are
Well,
allowed.
good luck with that.
I mean, this is an intrinsic basically.
Right. So naming.
I think address should be involved in the name.
So unsafe is below, and unsafe is unsafe dot
Is address below?
is address below. Works for me.
Why not is addressless?
Yeah. Since we're calling it address, we don't need to do it below and below anymore, I think. So.
Also works for me.
Addressless then. It gets longer, but
We already have a class. It's called unsafe. Or
Yes.
So
and now from now on all new APIs go there.
So you'd prefer less than and greater than as opposed to like before and after?
Yeah, because less than and greater than is existing terminology, and below and after seems like a synonym for less than, in the context of addresses at least.
would that be then larger than I guess?
Greater than.
should we call it address or reference? Right? We're comparing two references.
Well, if you say reference again, like
We're comparing two addresses.
what are you comparing? The value of the
No,
reference
you
or the
must
value of the reference references?
Yes, adding two references.
So you're comparing.
addresses.
Yeah.
Oh, you can extend that.
Yeah, the reference is.
Oh yeah, you can totally do that.
You just made
You never knew that?
No, I didn't notice that.
That's a life-changing thing.
Yes, it is.
You're just copy and pasting
Well,
it
it
to
sometimes
Notepad.
automatically extends, but only sometimes. So. Yeah.
Only so.
Thank you, Dino.
No,
No, you need to.
I don't get it.
It's correct.
Okay,
If
so-
it squiggles again, just ignore the squiggle.
All right, happy with this then?
Yes.
C# we cannot have like operators work on references.
They work on the values contained within the references. So you could actually, you could do like if A less than B,
Right.
but it's comparing the values that are pointed to by the references.
Right,
Whereas
but
when I compare the
but I
references-
cannot say like ref A less than ref B.
That would take a compiler feature, I think.
Oh, that seems somewhat more reasonable, I think, than inline IL.
No, can we actually jump? We have Matt Conyu on the Skype call, but you're not on the Skype call.
I'm not on the Skype call because I was on there for 10 minutes and nobody was on the call.
Okay. He's there now, so let's do the
You
engage.
jump on the call though.
To the string stuff.
Made it into security.
You have to fight harder.
Right.
Okay. I thought we were going in reverse
Can you
order.
hear us? I take that as a yes.
Hello.
Oh, no. Good.
Hello.
I know how to get things proved.
Can you hear us?
I can, yeah.
All right.
Perfect.
You may potentially drop in and out because Skype is being Skype and I'm using a Mac and that's not helping.
Well, I'm using Windows and that doesn't help.
Yeah, that's what I meant. You're using a Windows on Mac, so I'm asking for trouble.
Yeah, I just, because so Shin's now moved on to a new opportunity now, so
I haven't had a full chance to look at this. The only thing I could see with this is the syndication text input should be properties and not fields.
Yes. Yeah, other thing otherwise looks reasonable.
I have a question about the time to live. What is it?
Oh, he's on hold again because... Sorry, you were on hold because, again, Skype is being Skype. So what is...
The only, I don't know if you heard me, the only thing I could see with this said Shin's now gone on to new opportunities, so I'm coming at this reasonably fresh, and the only issue I see is the syndication text input field should be properties.
Yes. And then Christoph asked, what is time to live? What does it represent?
It's how long you should go till you refresh the feed.
And it's like an advice from the server? Is that what it is?
Yeah, this is actually part of the RSS spec, which we historically never had implemented. It's an optional field, and it's like how often do you have to refresh this? So like if a feed was putting out new articles like every few hours, they might put time to live to be an hour long. But then after you get outside the publishing hours, they might put it like up to 8 hours or something like that.
So why is it an int? And not
because
that's
what's in the spec. We could do time span, but yeah, let me look up the actual spec. Because I think it was just an int in the spec, but that doesn't mean we can't represent it as a time span.
I mean, clearly the spec has to decide what the int is, whether it's minutes or hours or days.
If it's a granularity problem, like we're afraid of somebody wanting millisecond precision when the spec says it's minutes, then we should at least put what the unit is in the name.
I would just change it to a time span because, it's a return value, so it's not like somebody can suddenly start returning weird values.
Fair enough.
And we just return, 1 hour, and then it's so much easier to deal with within existing APIs.
Do we like object model collection? Do we care?
Let's
skip days and skip hours.
Yeah.
What else would you use?
I don't know. List?
It's fine.
Definitely not use list.
List because it's an implementation type.
Yeah, it's actually called TTL in the XML document, and there's a number of minutes that indicate how long.
Feel it.
Number of minutes to indicate how long it's keep running.
All right, say again. It's time.
It's number of minutes for TTL field, and it's how long you can cache the document before having to refresh from the source.
Yeah, time span seems right.
Yeah, we generally don't like ints because then nobody knows what the unit is.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean,
having that as a time. The only problem with it being a time span is you lose fidelity. Syndication feed isn't just for reading feeds; you can generate feeds as well. And so, if we put a time span and someone puts in seconds, then what do we do?
Argument null exception? Or
one thing you could do is when when do you do the save operation logically? Do you have a save method, or when does this effect happen?
You build your whole object model, and then there's an API which I can't think of right now where you generate the XML in one shot.
I see. So one thing you could do is you could validate it and say if the time span is not an integral basically number of minutes, and you blow up.
It's on the property setter. Only allow time spans which have no seconds or milliseconds component.
Why not just make it a documentation?
Documentation that you what? That you're supposed to put minutes?
No, documentation that anything less granular than minutes gets truncated.
Yeah. And it would just call total minutes, cast it to an int, and move on with life.
Well, because such truncation is silent, like if you don't read the docs, it's kind of silent and you may be surprised. Versus the exception just lets you know, and you see the exception message says, you cannot set the field to anything but multiple.
Set that to anything less than 1 minute.
30 minutes and, 30 seconds.
Sure, so why punish them and just not round it down to 30 minutes?
So they learn. No.
Well, it's the exact same argument.
It's
I know,
not.
but he was arguing that it shouldn't. So I mean, if we think that we would throw on the granularity problem, then I think time to live minutes is fine, and somebody.
I'm good with either. I would.
But floating TTL is like great. Microseconds. So.
God damn it.
So does copy to throw or not?
Yeah, I forgot to reassign this guy.
I see.
So I was always overwriting the same couple of bytes.
So what were you saying about time to live?
Till expires or something, I don't know. Minutes till time to live.
Matt, can you hear us again?
I can, yeah.
Perfect. So basically what Christoph just said is he would throw.
Does the spec list a maximum value that could have?
Pardon?
Does the RSS spec list a maximum value that the TTL could have?
Open here. No maximum. Just an integer of minutes.
Of any arbitrary length?
Up to and including.
Does it say like the integer has to be like 10 digits or fewer or something like that? Okay. I mean, we're all
I missed that.
since we have to check for like negative values, so
Yeah.
may as well just do it.
Alright, so you think time span that
We already have a set of frozen.
that's fair. So throw if it's not an integral number of minutes.
Okay, so you're saying make it time span and throw when it comes to number of minutes.
Yeah, or
Like,
it's negative.
Yeah.
Or 0, presumably? I don't know. If 0
Zero just doesn't make sense. You're saying like, because that could trigger continuously fetching it.
So.
Like, I think 0 will be okay as long as it's a very explicit, they're asking for 0 and we aren't truncating it.
It depends on what the spec is saying. I mean,
Yeah, like just whatever the minimum and maximum the spec
Right.
is.
Well,
I mean,
it's about,
honestly, to me, 0 sounds like the value is absent, like it's almost the same. Wouldn't be sensible.
Then also 1 is not a valid value.
The computer time.
or we'll throw.
I think you could argue there is reason to allow a 0, because as it's defining how long you can cache for, a 0 value could mean don't cache this.
Yeah, don't
Yeah, I
cache
mean,
it.
so, like, you know what makes sense on that. We're just pointing out that negatives probably are going to throw, and that's where the, if it's not integral minutes comes in.
Right.
So.
All right.
So just make them properties and change the time to live to a time span, yeah.
Yeah, so I just did it actually do it? No, that can't, yeah. So you had the notes, I just commented.
Okay.
Alrighty.
Thanks.
So then
rather than any API change.
Oh.
Especially since the string comparisons one would only live in cold lib anyway.
so regardless of the actual shape, last week we discussed whether they can live in memory extensions, right? I think we concluded that the answer is yes. Is that fair?
Yeah, so all the ones that don't require globalization can live on memory extensions, which is the first half.
Well, even those, like, why would the other ones not be able to live there?
Because they require the globalization machinery that lives in core. So they will be net core specific. They could be exposed from memory extensions.
Sure, right.
Yeah.
It just means that the desktop version doesn't, like, lacks those APIs because we can't do them out of that.
Unless we essentially copy and create a slow version. Just to have parity for portable APIs.
Yet another thing somewhere.
The memory extension is already split, right, in terms of fast versus slow implementations.
Oh, you're saying you could still expose them in the same slot, so they would be API-wise identical.
Right.
Yeah, that would be that would also be fine. Like,
and
yeah.
what would the slow API do? It would
copy into a new string and then call the string APIs.
Call the string APIs. Yes. So it would not be only slow; it would be allocating.
Oh yeah. Yes. Exactly.
That worries me a bit because kind of the API signature implies that it's not allocating, but maybe that's okay.
It doesn't in core.
What?
It doesn't in core.
You could maybe work around that with some clever caching.
Correct?
Well, I thought your argument was you were afraid that slow span would have really bad characteristics.
No, these APIs, like even with FastSpan, if you call the API where you don't have access, well, it's correlated because FastSpan identifies APIs are the same thing, but it's, I mean, this has nothing to do with the slowness of the span itself.
No, well, I guess I was assuming that if you were using FastSpan, you would have access to the underlying APIs that you need.
Right.
Well, if you use the new core CLR, you would have access. Yeah.
So the point being, the bottom half slow span having allocations, or we could have parity with APIs, and the slow span version not
and
only
just allocate.
but allocates. Yeah.
That seems reasonable.
Yeah, I guess it's fine because it's temporary. I guess.
I mean, it depends on what you want to do, right? If you want to, yeah, you could also have the API and throw.
No. No. When did you drink this Kool-Aid?
Well, then you can write portable code without having to.
You can write portable code, but you cannot execute it.
The point is you can, you just have to write an if check rather than having to if that. So easier to do than
what will be the F check at that time?
You just ask the runtime. Ask for the runtime. Like if it's core, then you do it. Otherwise, you don't.
One concern that Jan had was about the replace API, which he said that these are usually convenience APIs that you want to just play around with. And given that there's convenience API, the signature is quite complex, especially for the one that takes screen comparison.
Is the wrong word here. Like
replace specifically, he was mentioning.
I would say, well, I had this debate with Christoph, right? And like I'm still not convinced that these APIs are super useful, but I think from Christoph's point, they represent an algorithm that, if you want to implement them yourself, yes, it may just be 5 lines of code, but boy does it suck if you have to debug the bounds like all the time, right? Yes, yes, it may be tedious to call, but that's probably easier and obvious. There's one very obvious way you can call them versus, I didn't have to find the bounds myself and do the math correctly and hopefully I didn't fuck it up. And so in that sense, it may be worth it to call the APIs just so that you don't have to do it yourself. That doesn't make them convenient, but it makes this convenient in the terms of not having you to implement the algorithm.
So I have a question about the Boolean returning members. Why are they not try? Because I assume the Boolean, they return false when the destination buffer is, for example, too small.
Right.
So they should be try, right?
So remove, replace, add left.
Okay.
Those ones. Yeah.
Yeah, it's parity with the string class. The string class is calling the same.
Well, but string APIs. No. String APIs are not the same signature because they allocate
same signature, but same name is doing the same functionality.
True, but I would say that to me this it's more an argument if you get the name doesn't matter anymore.
I'm not talking about source compatible. I'm talking about if somebody trying to search for something about a string has replace.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Would have replace.
As soon as you open IntelliSense and you try pad left will show up.
No, just pad left. If you call pad left, try pad left will show up.
That's what I'm saying. So if you just do IntelliSense, you just type in pad left, we will show this API if it's prefix of try. So this is more an argument for can you discover using the old name? Yes, you can. Can you get code to compile instantaneously? No, but that's true regardless. So in that sense, I would argue that as long as the name is included somewhere, I think it's fine.
We've made everything else be a try.
And I think more consistency with what we have.
So if we have the freedom to change the name, so I would suggest try replace, but I would add also ordinal to be very explicit, because this is very confusing in the string today. So people using replace and which does the ordinal stuff if you didn't pass any parameters in. And people expect it will work linguistically, culture aware.
So possibly, I'll tell you my concern about it. If we just add try, you kind of you start using span APIs and you learn that they try very hard not to allocate. Therefore, there are versions of APIs that used to be without try, now they are try and return the. Right. So, but it's kind of, if I saw a method on this type and it was called try replace, I would be like, okay, that's just a version of replace, except it doesn't allocate. When I see try replace ordinal, I'm thinking, is it different than replace on string? Or is the same and now they just decided to suddenly add the ordinal qualifier?
To be fair, though, but if you ignore span, you just look on string, we're in the same situation today. We have compare and we have compare ordinal. Given that ordinal is a term we have used on full framework already, I don't think it's a huge jump.
Well, but if the comment says does exactly what string.replace does, so then it only add the word ordinal if we're trying to distinguish the behavior.
The other idea is remove this signet. So it will be explicit all the time.
Well, except those are in the list of APIs that might not make it to the portable API.
Well, depends on how we do this, right? I mean, we could
Yeah,
always do a
just
slow
like
version of that.
That it ended up in the other bucket.
Yeah, if it's ordinal, he could actually implement it without access to. It would be just slower because it would go, char by char search and so on.
Realistically, are these actually going to be backed are these in general going to be backed by real string objects, just little, sliced views into them? Developers going to get instances of read-only-spans and char. Because if they're backed by string, then what you could do as an optimization is if you can pull out the backing object account, you can call into the actual globalization APIs.
So is try get string on span or on memory?
We don't have a try get string.
No,
Yeah.
well, you
We don't have it
access to
on span. We have it on memory. We do have it on memory, I think.
Oh, I see.
But not on span. So once you have a span, I don't think we can fish out the string.
No, I mean for slow span, I believe span is actually backed by 3 fields: an object, an offset, and a length.
Mm-hmm.
Don't we have internal access to that object field?
Yeah, we do.
Mm-hmm.
So we could fish it out of span or read only span.
So slow span would be faster.
No, slow span would have an optimization in case this does happen to be backed by a string.
And fast span wouldn't.
No, because fast span would have the proper APIs into the covers anyway, so it would already just be fast.
He's right. Good point.
Right. So how do we know that? Okay, yeah. If the span is backed by a string object, we don't need to do a copy.
You don't have to do a copy if it's not backed by a string object.
Yes.
So it won't allocate.
Okay.
In that case.
But I'm just kind of gut checking that I think the majority will be backed by a string object somehow. So
specific to try APIs, I would think that only the ones that return bytes written should be called try, and maybe we don't even want the bool for because those are you can do a constant time check beforehand.
I mean, like, you either need to return Boolean or throw.
Right.
yeah.
Like pad left, remove, those are ones that you shouldn't be, I don't know if you should be returning bool or not.
Well, it's like copy too, right? We don't just do nothing if the destination is too small to throw.
Yep. Right, that's what I meant.
So what's the total width in pad left, pad right?
So your how many characters you want to add is based on the total width and your input.
Oh, so it's total width of the padding on each side.
So let's say total width is 100 and your span is 20, you pad by 80. Total width is the same as the destination length. Yes,
You
can
know
show, yeah.
how much it's gonna grow.
Right. Same with remove.
It
That's
will-
why none of those APIs have byte written.
Bytes written will be total width,
That's right.
irrespective of what source.
Well, remove, I don't think that's true about remove.
No, but
Remove would be start index, count minus start index.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Right.
I was thinking about replace. The only
Yeah,
API
replace
that
is
doesn't
right.
have this property is replace.
yeah, replace can grow.
So now replace, should it be operation status kind of API?
I was going to ask a similar thing.
The thing is, it doesn't have any of the other states. It only has if it's not enough destination.
But should it
Well, should
make
it-
progress
Yeah,
instead of just abort?
Should you be able to continue?
Like, oh, I replaced from the first 100 characters, but then I ran out of destination space. When you resume, you should start at the 100 character mark.
But it can still make progress. It has bytes written as output,
That's
as an out parameter.
Do we have any of our span try things that return false yet still did work? And promise that they did work?
I see. So you're saying they all return operation status when they are promising.
I think that the ones that we have, if they return false, bytes written is 0.
That's a good point.
And that they hopefully didn't actually write any bytes before saying bytes written is 0. So like that's just a concern of how we're going to implement it.
And another thing is, so for replace, can the source and destination be the same buffer?
Or worse, can they be not the same but overlap?
I can see the scenarios that it can be the same buffer.
Yes, and I can see
You have
the
some
algorithm
span
being
you want to
utterly destroyed by overlap.
How does that affect the API shape?
Well, it's not clear from the API right now. I wonder whether
I think it's certainly possible to pass them in for the API. It's just whether or not you check and
Right.
thoroughly.
so.
And does it do something really bad?
But that's implementation detail,
Well,
right?
we have
Well, it needs to be part of the contract.
So we have APIs that do in-place transformations,
Right.
and they just take one span. It makes it very clear in the signature what's going on. They just take one span, it's a read-write span, and they take how much data there is in the span. Because if the transformation is expanding, it can expand to the whole span. So I don't know if we want to go, like the APIs get more and more difficult to use.
As we're
when
going
you
to
do it,
make
but-
people into each row.
Maybe
Was
we
it-
add
okay.
it in the future then if there's demand for
I
it.
mean, that was the last thing that was discussed. I don't know that it was decided.
I can see use cases for two lower in place, two upper in place, stuff like that. But those are really the only two. By the way, someone brought up an example last week of I think the German SF character. Are we sure the two lower and two upper will always preserve the number of characters in the string?
Yes.
Yes. That's
We
what.
don't.
I heard two different answers.
Okay. Yeah, we preserve the same number of characters. Yes.
Across all cultures?
No, for the ordinal culture.
Oh, for ordinal. Okay, that makes more sense.
Yeah, I mean we don't support the casing that it changes the character lengths.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean it exists in the Unicode standard, but we don't support it.
Like that's a good exercise. Like we do, and in the cases we don't, we just roll it the spec.
Because what I just did on my machine is I set the culture to be DEDE. I have two capital S's, and I
Right.
called two lower, and I got two lowercase S's,
Right.
rather than an SF character. So that's expected. I guess.
Yes.
They don't know which way it's supposed to go. Shrink. Nobody cares.
If only we had a German language expert in the room.
Yeah, that wouldn't be me.
Span. Which, then how do you fit that out of a string?
Thought you were checked out.
I did it the other way too, got two capital S's.
That's it.
So, okay, let's just go over this top to bottom so we can finally decide what to do. So trim ones, there was no feedback, right? We just take it as is, right? Is white space we are fine with?
I have a suggestion. Can we call that is white space or empty? The reason being, does it return true or false if you pass in an empty?
True. Because that's what is null or white space does for string.
Yeah.
Is it? I think it's empty or white space,
It's
right?
empty or white space.
And what about now?
Isn't there is null or white space on string?
Yeah.
Sorry?
Is null or white space? And it returns true on
There's an
empty.
empty one too.
Yeah, so we have two.
I think it's null or empty. I don't think there's empty or white
There's
space.
null or empty, and then there's something or white space, which is
Because we can't have null, it would be as empty or white space.
empty or white space is good,
I am fine with that.
unless it confuses people about the is null or white space.
So
Um,
one quick question, Garen. So trim, after you trim, you point to the same span?
Yes. Well,
It's essentially a clever slice.
trim end is just slice. Trim start is forward, or trim end is slice with a smaller length. Trim start is forward slice, and trim is both.
It's search and then slice.
But you're definitely just getting like it's the same memory. You're just range.
right, so
So
then...
string has is null or empty or is null or white space. It doesn't have anything about is empty and white space.
Exactly.
So I don't either way.
Well, the argument was, I think you said this, right? There's no such thing as null here, right?
Therefore, it should be maybe is just
Right, but
is white space.
It is null or white space returns true for empty.
Yes.
And removing the null or for span would be then is white space where empty is defined by the other method to be white space. So is white space is fine.
Okay.
And it returns true. Even though empty contains no white
So
space.
for remove, we don't need the
It contains
bool.
no non-white space
We would
either.
throw for
It matches
destination not
null
big
or
enough.
white space. I just like it's the span
It'll
overload
return
for-
true for
Let's call it is not white space.
is not white space.
It's not white space.
does not contain non-white space
Not
characters.
is not white space.
I mean,
Alright.
like the only problem with this empty or white space is it calls into question of like, wait, does that mean this null or white space does something different on empty? So it just adds ambiguity while we're trying to.
Alright. So then remove, we said it's try remove.
No, it was just a void with throws a dash.
It's the same thing as the other one. Okay, void with remove.
We don't see what you're typing.
Then, well, I'm typing it here because my life is easier if I can look forward. And then replace, same thing.
Replace, we return operation status instead.
Do we have that at this level?
Really?
Oh, actually, that's a good point. Down.
Right.
Why not?
Import.
I mean, like,
Where does
we
it go?
could, because
It's memory.
Are you sure?
Double with the other
We added some framework APIs that use it. But
No, we didn't. I'm fairly sure operation status is not down.
Well, we had an issue that Stephen filed where he talked about that, and then we ended up not as so. We basically just said it's predicated on whether any other API is needed.
Yeah, then we had Broadly, which used it, and it lived on top as well.
And then and so like I think if we ever need it down, we would just push it down. It's just that we haven't pushed it down probably because nobody ended up needing it.
But this one's a weak candidate for needing operation status, I would imagine.
I mean, it has at least enough argument. I'm fine with that. I would be void.
Right.
So I actually, when going back to replace, I disagree. Is one error condition.
Okay.
So if the destination is too small,
Right.
and also if at the end of the first buffer you detect the old value, but not whole one, you need to ask for more input because you don't know whether you replace it or not. You know what I mean? Let's say the old value is AB, and you at the end of the span and you see an A. Destination is not too small. You need more data.
But there's no condition that compares that version versus we have no more data. What if that's it, and you don't want to replace the last?
if you get the needs more source data and you know you're at the end, then you're like, well, that means it wasn't the match.
Yeah, exactly.
So domain knowledge.
Alright, so we are fine with those signatures.
And I do.
Alright, now let's talk about equals and compare. Any concern with those APIs as they are?
Yeah, look good. Why is there another replace? Is it?
That's the
is
one
there
that
a
takes string
difference?
comparison.
Oh, okay. This is the
Overload.
The overload there would, yeah.
okay.
Sorry, what did you ask?
Why is there another replace?
Oh, another replace.
Just to clarify why these have to be separate, is it because with the culture, the compare info needs to span overloads as well?
What do you mean? Which ones are separate?
These are separate. They're not in the OOP because in order to implement them, they need to compare the culture compare info or the intro stuff. Don't have span overloads.
But now we just decided we're gonna have them all in all places because we will. Correct. We will basically have 3 call paths. In the kind of if it doesn't run on core CLR, it will try to get span out of this. I mean, try to get the string out of this span and then call the existing APIs, or it will just copy, basically call source dot to string or whatever.
There's a string construct. Oh yeah, but that's not one.
Yeah, create basically a string from the source destination and just
How
call
is
the.
the OOP going to be able to check whether or not it is a string? How's it going to try to cast it as a string?
It has access to the field, the object field inside span, and it will just say, is it a string?
Well, maybe not array because then you can't call it. How does this work if you're calling an extension method on span of char? Are these hid? Like, will these actually show up?
On span of char?
Yeah.
Specifically?
Specifically. Because I didn't think that it was.
Oh, I see what you're saying. No. Needed to do sometimes read-only-span and span. But I think for these of char, will be relatively rare, and then the thing you can do is just say as read-only-span. Now you can call these APIs.
Because I was thinking back to the scenario that you had earlier where you're doing a bunch of transforms one after the other. So you have your source and your destination, and then your destination becomes your source for the next method, which means that that's actually span of T, not
yeah. But you can do, as read-only-span. I mean, of course, you have to know to do it, so maybe we want to add it. I'm not saying we shouldn't add it, but I don't know if it's worth it.
Okay.
It's like we would have to basically double the number of methods here.
Well, let's see if it becomes a problem.
Right, then...
And so all the two upper ones, they can be void as well.
I was about to say, it seems like very consistent.
The last one is essentially what Christoph mentioned is the replace that takes bool, or returns bool, and takes string comparison. What do you want to do with that?
But we'll also return operation status to begin with, right? Because that will be what we did above.
The only thing is that, okay, so this one is a bit more tricky, because if he gets this string,
right,
and then calls the string operation, he cannot store the state for later. It may be tricky to implement, but probably it's doable.
It'll be extremely
You know what I
tricky,
mean? Like, this API promises that it can continue, like, do as much progress as it tell you I'm done here, and then you can call it again.
So
and
if
it will
the
continue.
last two sets characters is AB and you're looking for ABC, it will not replace it and will say give me more data. Maybe there's a C in there.
Well, you can always return bytes or written.
I do that already. Oh.
And then basically just say I always restart. Like there is no continuation. Either the buffer is big enough for the output string, or it's not. In which case you always start over. Like it will not be efficient, but you should always be able to.
Okay, in the worst case, you can do really inefficient implementation that asks you for a massive output buffer always. Okay, fine.
But the question is that
you know how big it will be.
You should try to implement it a bit better than Emo suggested.
No, because the problem with that is
But
if you don't know the source is over, and you do it and it does nothing and says not enough source, you have to redo it again. The return is not enough source, and redo the whole thing again. Defeats the purpose.
Right. Well,
defeats the purpose if you in the world where you don't have access to the actual APIs.
Okay, sure.
Compare to versus compare, since it is an extension method, should probably match the other instance methods on string.
There is an instance method on string that says compare.
No, the instance method is compare to. The static method is compare.
that is.
Okay.
If you say that, I buy that. Like it seems not unheard of.
Compare to is like compare the current instance with another string.
Right, and this is the current instance.
No,
because
this is a static really. I mean, like not current instance, right?
Well, it depends on really how we expect people to call it, right? If people are calling it, passing in basically this dot something, then it's an instance method, even though it's static. I mean, it's whatever.
Where's index off, by the way?
We have index of 1T.
Yeah, index of already exists.
But it doesn't accept the string compare.
No, it does not.
How do I get index off with the string compares? Just a longer version of contains, right?
So
parsing is really what you want.
So it's ordinal. Is that the case? Is that the case?
String comparison?
No, all these APIs.
Right.
If string comparison doesn't show in the signature or culture info, it's ordinal.
No.
Is that?
Okay, so
Which
by default it's culture aware, current culture, by default. Except replace and equal without parameter.
I see. Okay, now I understand your comment about adding the ordinal suffix.
Right. This is why the string is very confusing today. So if you say like S1 equal S2, this is ordinal. If you say S1 dot equal S2, this is still ordinal, right? But if you say compare x1 and s2, this is culture aware.
So why?
Why?
Okay. So why would we not do? They are all ordinal unless specified. What do you think about this?
So by default it's ordinal.
Unless you specify.
Again, about if somebody using a string today, they will be confused about using this.
Would they be? Because honestly, what you just told me is highly confusing.
No, I mean people used to it. It has been long time they are using this string APIs, so they understand how it works today.
Do they?
Actually, yes, they have to.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
I think honestly the way it happens is people write code. The code works in the 3 cultures they happen to care about. And that's it. I don't think they actually understand what the differences are. Now, if you already port the code to span, there's a million things you can do wrong anyway. So my argument would be, I would be more with Christoph and say, for this API service, I think they would be better to say, okay, this is our chance to fix this, and say, you can get any behavior you want. If you really want to get consistency with full framework, sure, you pass in, string comparison, current culture for, the comparisons if you really care.
So,
otherwise you don't.
a couple quick comments. First of all, there is a fix that's suggested to give you culture all the time, which is kind of a pain on some of them. And second of all, when people do culture or ordinal, what they care about is uppercase. If you solved uppercase and lowercase in a culturally, that's where the cultural awareness of the uppercase and lowercase, but that's why people use it. People use ordinal when they don't want a,
That's right.
That's why they use ordinal. And so there's, it's for a better case.
Most of the time, people complain and with the string when using the default, compare, and they got surprised about like some unexpected result, which is linguistically true, but they don't expect this.
Right.
Yeah. So I agree. Still there is some people confused, but
If you want to make it better, make compare to an enum and not have them have to go look up what -1 and 1 are. They're.
But technically we don't guarantee -1 and +1. We just say less than 0 and higher than 0.
Yeah. So.
The thing is that compared to is a pattern in the framework, and it always works the same way. So yes, somebody needs to learn it about the framework, but it always works the same way. We don't have compare to method that returns some versus the string. Semantics of strings comparisons are all over the place. You have to kind of remember, and it's not super easy to remember. And I'm also with emo. So I've been working on this. I've been working on BCL team for 20 years, and I don't know. Seriously, I don't know some. I know many, but not all.
I actually didn't know replace, so that was I would have added extra stuff to replace unless it didn't.
So the one thing we can do with the ones that take enums, we can default them. The nice thing with defaulting it is what the default is because it tells you in IntelliSense. One problem with overloads is you don't know if you omit the argument what the value is. You don't have to read the docs.
So the IntelliSense will telling you this is
It will basically tell you in brackets what the default value is. It would say string comparison .ordinal. So it will tell you that if you omit it, that's what it will use.
So if you did that instead of making the lack of it be still legal but mean something different, that's what I was going. I don't like that to say that if you allow it to be optional and then the default is different than it is in the non-span version, that's when I think that you're really confusing people. If you now require it and default is something different, I think that's fine. Default it to what you think is right as long as it's going to be there. I think that would be okay.
Just copy and paste code without rewriting it. So they
don't. I get that, but as soon as you get bugs, you start fussing around with the IntelliSense and
is people argue that we have bugs not there. Right? Really, when you compare to string and say, yeah, it's equal, and say, no way this is equal. Right? So they think it's our bugs, and and it's really their bugs, not our bugs.
I don't know, maybe, I'm a non US citizen, right? So the way I think about this is if something looks different on screen, then I'm always surprised. If the bytes are different, and the answer is it's different, I'm
okay. But ordinal, but But there is other, I mean, like, like if you have this one, right? Whatever,
Right.
and you have this one,
Right.
you have these two strings, you look to this, are equal or not equal to you?
But clearly, no.
Clearly it's yes, linguistically yes.
But that's what I'm saying. I think as a developer, I would be, like, I'm more inclined to say if I want them to be like identical. I understand maybe there's some option I have to pass in to make them identical. Like my default assumption would be if the memory is different, then I would expect them to be different. I think the reverse is worse, where the
You are right.
the contents of the buffers
Okay.
are different.
You are right.
Maybe
This is English, right? But if you are in different culture, it doesn't make any sense. For example, about Turkish eye.
German is one of the
Turkish eye
cultures.
is one very good example about
Right.
like I like this and I like this.
Right.
This is not capital I Latin. This is
Right.
different term. For very surprised. These are equal.
well,
On the screen,
I guess
even.
what I'm trying to get at is that it depends on what you want the comparison to do. Like I think I would be more, like basically what I'm trying to get at is that there's like false truths and then there's like false false, right? Like where you expect it to be true but it's false, or you expect it to be false but it's true, right? And I mean, so the question is.
I agree with you. I mean, like if I'm rewriting the string class from scratch, I will do what Christoph suggested about like everything is ordinal.
That's your
Right? And if you need linguistically, you can just you have overloads for this.
Right. I would say that's
Can't we just require it?
That's your
Can't we
one
just
strength.
require it?
Require what?
Require string comparison? Require it to be stated.
Don't have a default.
Don't have a default. If the default only serves to confuse people, it's not helpful.
So, okay, let me tell you why I think that's wrong. And the reason it's wrong is that's effectively what FXCorp tried. They want you every single time you didn't pass in the culture. Guess what people do?
String comparison is slightly different than culture.
You say that, but like in the end, the problem is you open up the IntelliSense and string comparison. There's like 6 values, and the thing, and we have seen this at DBSL time and time again. If you make people choose, like the thing is, on average, what's your chance that the person typing the code in makes a better decision than we do? And on average, I would say the answer is usually they don't. They just pick a random value at some point. And like I would say, if we can make a default that is better than a random choice, it's probably better.
So I would agree with that, but I also can see your point about
You two are arguing
There's
over what
basically-
right is. How could we possibly?
you see code and it says string the next line, and it's a span, but you don't know, it's just a variable name and it contains.
Right.
And they look to you exactly the same, and they have very different semantics. There's something weird about it.
So, but I mean, I guess the other thing I tried to get at, which I think I'm not doing a good job of, is like, take, for example, the semantics we have with how we parse numbers in the framework, right, where you pass in the culture, right? So, unfortunately, we made the choice that the default is current culture. Or toString, same thing, the default is the current culture. So there's 2 kinds of bugs you can have based on the default, right? If the default is, let's say, invariant or ordinal or whatever, the worst bug you can have is that things look shitty on the screen. Versus if the default is current culture, then the worst bug you have is you cannot read the data that you have written earlier. So you have data corruption in the output, right?
Is that potentially just an artifact of that .NET was originally used to make WinForms apps?
Yes. No, that is basically what it is. I
UI
mean,
in general. It's not
UI
just
in
WinForms,
general.
because the same thing happens if you get it across the wire.
and that's why I'm saying, like, if you choose a default, like, you basically choose the kind of bugs you can have. And I think it's then if things don't look right on screen, or consumers, when they look at output, they don't think the output makes sense. But if you return, for example, two strings are considered equal when they do not have identical bytes, it's the same kind of bug. It's like, well, they should have been equal, but we said they're not. I think it's a different kind of bug than, two different bytes return true because it may, screw over your caching or whatever else you do when you actually make assumptions about that. So you basically choose your kind of bug, and I think that is.
I don't buy that there's an ability to say that a bug that returns true when it should return false is worse than a bug that returns false when it should return true. You have absolutely no idea what logic happens next, and I think that's bogus.
No, it's not just true or false, right? The argument is that you basically make a decision on the contents of the buffer. And if the buffer literally has the same bytes, then clearly it will return true or false in both cases.
So
but if the buffer has different bytes, then the question is, if you return true, is this netwise better or worse?
So you have a scenario where, well, there are clearly scenarios where it would be better to have the default to be ordinal and say that they have to be exactly matched to true. And I could come up particularly UI-focused scenarios where it would be absolutely, this is your point, you're thinking UI, you're thinking what the user sees. The user goes, what the heck are you talking about that those things aren't the same? In fact, they're coming out even looking the same on my screen. I can't tell the difference. I'm absolutely broken if you make an assumption that it should be ordinal, it should not. I'm going to say we do not have the capacity to say that bugs that are because something says it's true when it's false are worse than bugs that say it's false when it should be true by the programmer's intent. And so that's why I think we have to require it because it's a freaking mess out there. Any default we do will be misunderstood some of the time by some programmers, and if they do what Emo suggests, they're just going to pick the top one in IntelliSense. It'll be on screen in their face when they're looking at it. It's going to actually be in their code. It's not going to be a default they have to look at.
So what about this?
Right, it may be wrong, but at least they have to see it.
So let's start. Can we start with you explicitly have to always specify, and a bit more advanced developers who look for performance and correctness, and then if we kind of discover that people don't like the situation, we can always add the default.
Right.
But at that time, maybe they will already, like, people who use the APIs will learn. Maybe we will do it in 5 years, at the default. And by that time, everybody will know that, you know.
Well, how this would be different than today?
Yeah, I was about to say, like, we had 20 years.
No. It would be different because there wouldn't be contains that just take span and value. You have to always pass string comparison.
That's right, but after 5 years, what will happen?
They'll either have yelled at us or not.
We will just, because, you know.
Right, you're right. It is a preview.
We're trying, they'll yell or they won't yell. And maybe if they yell, the answer is that doesn't ever even exist, but we take the main case.
People already yell today. I mean, there's this, like, super popular thing that Hanselman pushed at some point to say, you know, string equals, and there was a few others where they said, I don't want to pass in the fucking thing at the end because it's a lot of text. Like, people yell at us for that already today. So I don't think, like, 5 years longer will give us any more insight that the last 20 years haven't given us, or 15 years, realistically, because public previews seem to be public. But
maybe we will have, like, another API to configure this. I mean, like, my default is
like
ordinal,
thread that
so
current culture.
Oh yeah, async local.
My default is current culture. And you will call the default, and you will have.
Open culture in the source file.
I mean, that's basically what you have here when you're forcing them to pass it in.
So my other question is, so let's say pass and culture all the time. Like is everything that is culture sensitive or ordinal sensitive already marked?
No, so to lower.
Absolutely, understand. I did not say pass culture in all the time. I said pass in string comparison.
Yeah, like the comparisons. I mean, well, we have both already, right?
So for comparisons, we almost have it, except it's not in replace, unless I don't see the last parameter.
This one at the bottom?
Well, both of them.
The first one doesn't, yeah, that's ordinal.
Because
this one is. This one has string comparison.
But we have another overload that doesn't take this, right?
So should we basically just not have overloads that, you know, don't take, basically remove the first method, the first replace, this one here. Just have the second one, you always have to pass the comparison.
So are you talking about the one at the very top of the screen?
Yes.
Well, that's just, that... Oh, sorry. Okay, I thought you were talking about the one.
Yeah, sorry, like
it's basically, this one has implied ordinal.
Right. Which is what string replace does.
Maybe it's, I don't know.
I'm fine. I mean, like, quite frankly, especially the replace API, it's not the one that will be a one-liner to call regardless. So
okay.
Adding one more value will not change the API drastically.
So the only ones that have implicit culture are the two lower and two upper.
that would be true. But that also wouldn't be string comparison, right? That would be worse.
Yes, that's culture info. But the default today, it's invariant culture. Is it invariant or current? Current culture.
Current culture.
Well, which is...
To be fair, though, they have
But that
overloads.
one's more complicated because, yeah.
API name has word ordinal on it, and it will be explicit at that time. I'm calling the ordinal. I mean, like, replace ordinal.
Yeah, so you're saying something like, let's just do contains, because maybe replace a little more. Contains and possibly contains culture, contains ordinal, and no plain contains, or.
No, I mean like contain ordinal. So this will work as ordinal. Contains without ordinal, it would be like current culture or whatever.
I don't see that much different from that than overloading. I mean, providing a default value for string comparison as ordinal.
It is a few less characters if you're counting characters. It shows up a little. In one case, it's their intelligence choice when they pick the method, and the other when they get out to the end, they're faced with a choice. It's those kinds of differences, so they're subtle.
Okay.
But I think there is a little bit of experiential difference.
So if we have ordinal in the method name, it would be very explicit, and we wouldn't have to pass extra parameters.
Would you, if you did have contains ordinal, would you still have like a bool ignore case parameter?
Yeah, we can add this. Yes. We can have it, yeah, or we can have another overload for it.
There's some of our APIs that are ordinal specific.
But like the string comparison is not such a big deal. Once you start going to like ignoring case and this, like it's an I mean, just say string comparison dot, ordinal ignore case.
Oh yeah. I was talking specifically about the APIs that do ordinal comparisons, not the culture ones.
I'm just trying to solve about what default should we have, and at the same time, people don't have to specify a lot of stuff while calling the API.
So I would say people who don't understand it, they just want default for a very complicated space where they should care, they don't care, they should just use string APIs. Like if you hear, you like how did you get the span of char? You probably thought, geez, I want non-allocations. I'm like, this is a bit of more sophisticated software. The same developers who care that deeply about perf, they care about correctness probably a bit more as well, and they want to be explicit about what's happening. Not like, I called, I called too lower. I wonder what happens. Let me, think about it.
I wouldn't agree about people care about performance, will care about correctness. It's two different things. I can care about performance, but
would you agree that they're thinking a little more deeply about their code? They're not just trying to get down the fastest thing that does the job. They are thinking more deeply about code in general, and so this small annoyance of picking an extra thing, it's not the person who's like doing that, It's the person who's actually thinking, what is my code doing? How is it doing it? Is it as fast as it can be? Or I have a performance problem. And I agree with you. They're not necessarily focused on correctness, but I do think they're focused more deeply on their code.
And they would probably make their own extension method to wrap ordinal comparisons anyway.
For index of should be a char value, not ReadOnlySpan char.
What? No.
The value that you're looking for should be a single value, right?
It can be.
We have others called index of any that has the.
I'm looking for the string. I'm looking for the substring where that starts.
There's a couple of overloads, one of which does require just a single char, but then this replaces the string and does everything.
Right.
It's possible people complain and ask for an overload that they don't have to have a span, they can just pass the char in, which is what they do for one of the overloads right now. They might ask for that.
So the culture here, to lower to upper. What do people think? I would Basically, the ones that don't take culture.
Which imply current culture.
I'd be fine with that.
And then, like if people complain about it, we can add them. But now we have an.
In that case, why do we need the two-lower invariant as well? You can always pass in culture invariant.
It's a convenience method that exists on string as well.
Right. Okay.
So does the other one, without the culture.
Same with the two-lower.
Yes, but it's a bad practice to use it. It's a bad practice to use it. So, let's.
So should we remove it then?
No, invariant. No, those are great. No, the one we got rid of, I think, was a bad practice.
Okay.
Two-lower without a culture.
But two-lower invariant is equivalent to you passing in invariant culture.
Yeah,
right?
but your code reads better if you do it that way. You can,
But they don't. Like, it's not a surprise what culture gets selected because it's clear by the name.
If it wasn't on string, I wouldn't add it.
Yeah.
I think it's. I have a small vote to leave it, but yeah. Okay.
So this is the API string?
Did we remove the replace those up top?
Yeah.
Oh, on this replace, can we document what the possible return values of operation status are? Because things like invalidated don't really make sense.
No,
Well, because operation status has several values on it, right? Some of which might not be applicable here.
What if you have an unpaired surrogate?
The incoming data. Well, if you have an unpaired surrogate, then it just doesn't match.
Or it's invalid data?
No.
What does current string APIs do?
No, it's just.
They ignore unpaired
Yeah.
surrogates? Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Because otherwise.
Convenience over correctness?
Well, otherwise, replace would always return not enough input data. Because how does the developer ever say, like, there's no more data after this? You have a Boolean end of data flag.
I'm not sure if I understand what.
So how do you know that, like, the source that I'm passing into you isn't part of, like, the collected works of Shakespeare? It could be, but, like, it would be silly to assume that. So we would never return, for instance, not enough input.
Yeah, the compiler team hit the issue about some people.
No, we return not enough input. I'll tell you when. Yes.
When?
Because let's say your old value is AB, and you passed a source that ends with A. We say not enough data.
What if my old value is A and my source ends with B, but the next character of the real source would have been A because I'm passing the source child?
And this is easy for ordinal, as you are seeing, but for linguistic, it's. Yeah. If your string end with this and you're searching with this, you will say not enough data.
If you find an A at the end?
Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know if it's easy to implement, but yes, that would be the
complicated to implement.
But you are very smart.
It's important. That's why.
It seems dangerous if we're returning something. The reason that I say that's dangerous is because imagine a developer who is going to replace a larger source with a smaller replacement. So he allocates his destination to be the same size as the actual incoming data. So he knows that it's never going to fail. Now he just calls replace without checking the return value. Because why would it return anything other than done?
Well, so we should talk about this offline because we spent so much time on this. The other alternative is just not correct. So you feed basically chunks of spans into our pipe, and it will give you incorrect data if you want to replace AB, but AB is in one span and B is in the other.
Yeah, but this isn't a pipe. This is basically
a
string slice.
I think the moment we return operation status, we kind of imply that the API can be used within a pipe.
So maybe it's a wrong return type.
Correct. That's what I'm saying. I don't think we can return operation status and not return I need more data when A is found at the end, but I'm searching for AB. Because it will be basically incorrect code if you run it through the pipeline. Do you agree?
Yes, but I never saw these as pipeline APIs. I saw these as string.
And they shouldn't return the operation
So
status.
should we go back to bool and try replace?
So
Sure.
what about to return the last found replaced substring or sub characters? I mean, like, if you search a small
Yes.
string and big string, so you replace, and at the end you just return the what's that about? Like, we stop here for plus.
That's exactly what the APIs that I was the semantics do.
But it will.
Because there is a there are output parameters.
Right.
So it will basically consume up to the last A, and it will say this is how much I consumed. I cannot make a decision about the last
Right.
A.
The rest of the.
I need more data. And if you have more data, you stitch it using like a stack allocated span.
Yeah.
And then you pass more data, and it can say that whether it was A and B or it was A and C.
Yeah.
And
this is the appropriate place for that.
so, like, if we don't want the API to go to basically be used in, and we have a reusable routine that does the stitching.
Oh, okay.
So if we don't want the API to be used in this routine, it shouldn't return the operation status, because basically people will just use it and it will be not correct, and it will be not correct only in like weird edge cases when A and B are at the at the boundary between two different spans.
But in that, if with operation status, we also need to add the parameter of consumed, bytes consumed,
Correct.
which we don't have.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm fine with going back to Boolean and basically just saying this is an API. You have to have the whole. It doesn't work with chunked spans. It has to be the whole span, and the destination has to be large enough for the replacement to work. If it doesn't, then we return false.
But we still return the last found replacement.
Bytes return.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which is
Okay,
this
let's
is
do
very
this.
useful. I mean, like.
So the consensus was for replace, we name it try replace and return bool instead of operation status.
How does a caller know how large a string the destination needs to be?
They try, and if it fails, they make it larger and try again.
You have an upper bound. You have an upper bound where it's based on source length divided by the old value length.
Yeah.
So you can have an upper bound, and you know for sure you're going to succeed.
Yeah, but I mean, we could be talking about which realistically is not going to happen.
But how you know that you return? I mean, like, if there is no enough buffer, but you replace some substrings, you return false or true?
If there's not enough.
No, if we don't return operation status, this API is not something that you can continue after it fails.
I understand. I mean, like, your suggestion is to return Boolean, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So if you could replace and return Boolean, and you replace some substring, and you found at the end, I don't have. What you return, false or true?
False.
It returns false.
And also return in the out parameter how large the destination needs to be for it to succeed.
No, when it's false, the out parameter has no.
But then how do we expect the caller to ever do the right thing?
You grow the out destination buffer.
And if that doesn't succeed, you grow it again and again.
Well, so the only other alternative we have is operation status. It allows you to continue, but then it has to have the semantics that I described, which may be difficult to implement, and I think it's doable to implement it, but it may be not worth it. It's like 2 weeks of work, I kind of guesstimate, to do the gymnastics, especially for all cultures.
I really don't want pipelining APIs here, though, because this is for people who are used to working with fully self-contained data, like string.
I'm naive on this stuff, so my naive question to contains.
Because contains, there's no destination buffers. So replace basically mutates. It needs a destination buffer. And if the destination buffer is not the right size, there's all this complexity.
Okay.
But in theory, if you were using operation status, contains could still return potentially needs more input data.
Okay.
If you're doing like a streaming pipeline.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
I would really recommend leaving the signature of try replace, but having the out parameter return the actual number of characters it would have been written. Otherwise, I don't think the caller is ever going to do the right thing. I mean, at that point, we're talking like Win32 style APIs, and I'm going to go.
For most of our APIs on false do not give any useful information from the out parameters.
And also, the method would have to continue. Like, let's say you pass a input buffer with 10 bytes.
Yeah.
We would have to walk the whole input buffer.
Which you're going to have to do anyway, if the operation would have succeeded. And presumably, the caller wouldn't have called you if he didn't want it to succeed.
So basically, measure API.
Yeah.
But now we then walk twice. Once for the measuring, and then once.
No, so what you do is you optimistically, then you keep walking
Right.
to the actual calculation, and then tell the caller, this is how much you actually need to give me. That way, optimistically, if the caller gave you the right size buffer, you just do it in one shot. This also means that you're destroying the output buffer even if you return false.
So I would start.
But this means that we are going to allocate some buffers to do the rest of the operation.
It turns out string.replace already does that today.
I mean, not
you can't get away without. You need to keep track of how many different items you've seen, like where all of those indexes line up, which means that you actually have a separate allocation under the covers. String.replace today already has a separate allocation, separate from the actual alpha string that it's allocating. And the reason that it has that allocation is to keep track of where it's seen data. The span.replace method would need that same behavior for the most part. I mean, it has some optimization saying if I see like fewer than X number of things needing replacement, I can do a stack alloc, otherwise I spill over to the heap. Like you can do stuff like that, but you can't align it entirely.
So what's the consensus then for the API shape?
I just think that if we start doing what you said, we need to invent new method name signature. It's a new pattern. We don't, basically, our try APIs, they either work or they fail. They don't like, oh, let me try to work. If I cannot work, then I will do something different.
Right.
Like
and
measure,
and
like it's...
What we really need to see then with try replace is an example of how a caller is supposed to use it. Like,
I think this one would be used, like, as the signature is today, it will be used for short strings, like I have, 20 characters, and I know that I will be replacing A, B with A, so it's going to shrink, so I'm going to just allocate destination that is basically the same length as the source, and I'm going to call it, and I'm done. Anything more sophisticated, I think we need to specifically design the API and make it pipelined, make
so
add
what you
measure.
described as a replace method that returns void and throws up a destination system.
I don't know. We don't have any throwing APIs here.
You're saying that logically it's the same as that,
It's
not
the-
physically.
Well, too lower invariant, throw, if the destination is too small. Like, we have APIs that throw, because they expect that the callers pass in a properly sized output.
Sure, I agree. But you kind of know what the size should be because of what Tarek said.
Yeah, but
Nice.
replace is the same if you just said that the typical use case is you're replacing longer data with smaller data.
That's a good question.
Typically,
You're
yes.
more culture
but it
aware
doesn't-
than me.
What's that?
Are there cultural two buffers and two lowers that will result in a different number of bytes at the end?
No.
Okay. I didn't think so. I just wanted. Okay.
So I think we need more sophisticated APIs, but I would do it as a separate work item.
So do we remove try replace then?
We could. I would.
So what you? So if, in your view of try replace, do you see it throwing if it's too small, or do you see it returning false?
I would return false. And the reason for it, I kind of, the other APIs, it's nonsensical to call too lower and pass a smaller buffer. This one, yes, the mainline scenario is what I described, and it will not throw. But there are some other scenarios, like we have many APIs already in the framework, where they deal with small buffers. So what they do is they attempt to do the operation, and if they cannot complete, they return false. Yeah. And then you just double up the buffer size, and it will succeed next time. So there's a short loop.
Okay, I just have a question for you. Okay, so I have two scenarios. One scenario I've given you too small a buffer, and the other scenario is that the string's not found. Is try replace here supposed to be I found it and replaced it? Is that what that Boolean normally means?
No. It's just about the size of the destination.
Right. So it will return false only if there is no enough buffer. Right. This is the only logic. Okay.
But so you just said you expect the caller, if he sees false, to double the size of the destination and try again. Is that guaranteed to succeed here?
You mean when you call it second time?
Yeah.
No, you then double again, and it will.
In perpetuity.
Sure, it's going to end up very quickly. It's a exponential function.
I don't think we should be in the habit of having our callers make exponential functions. Security hat on. Like, we shouldn't really be in the habit of getting our callers used to doing exponential data based on potentially untrusted user input.
Well, but I don't understand how you could possibly solve that problem. Like the caller cannot possibly know without doing the algorithm of replace what the exact size of the buffer has to be.
Yeah.
There always has to be some sort of.
Just have this do the task.
So if you pull that out and you don't have that at all, then what you're getting is that if the span is too small, the destination is too small, then they're going to wind up with an exception, which is going to hurt their performance. And because the entire design is not to hurt their performance, it's to improve it, this exists so that that's why this exists, right? But we can't get enough information back. Is that the story?
Yeah, well,
is there a char replace in straight?
No, it's just regular replace.
I think you should have it. It's not complicated enough.
Well, the reason it's just regular replace is because they allocate, right? You can always allocate an output.
So replace makes sense to have. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying try replace doesn't seem like it's giving you much but confusion. And like I said, I read it wrong. I didn't think it was doing what it's doing. And so I feel like maybe I'm the only one on the planet that will ever look at that and have the expectation that I had that was completely wrong. It is possible.
It's a good point. Because we have
I would pull it till you have an API that's sufficiently complicated. For example, with a tuple, or for example, with something else. And maybe if you have an exception thrown, at least tell them what buffer. That it's a steeper work.
Question about bytes written. This is the number of bytes written to the output buffer, right? To the
yes, and also another should it be charged?
No, yeah, I understand, but why we don't give a hint also to return about where we replace the last string in the source string source? Useful for the allocation, as you mentioned. About if I have buffer 10 characters and I pass 5 character destination and reach 7 characters, it fits in the 5. So I know that I don't have to allocate another 5 if the remaining is just
an API that Christoph was describing.
It's not pipelines, but it's just a hint about how far I want to the source and replace strings there.
Yeah, that sounds exactly like the pipeline API, because in the case that you were describing, you want to be able to do partial data, and then the next time you call this method, just pass in a different window of the input string and a different output buffer, and then you'll just manually stitch them all up at the end, right?
Right.
Yeah, this was exactly
but I'm saying adding this will not complicate the API.
So what about this? We're kind of running out of time. What if we just remove it and basically this one method and try to design it and add it later? Because it seems like it would be good to support the pipeline scenarios, maybe have some measure APIs for some other things, and it's not replace is critical. Anybody opposes to this plan? Wes?
Sounds good.
Great. Sounds great.
I just think it's worth removing.
Excellent. You're done? Finally.
No, it was originally replaced. We renamed it to try replace as part of this. Remove it as is, as we.
So there's no replace at all? There's not a replace?
No, there's just nothing.
We will replace the replace APIs with something better.
Interaction slash pattern works out.
Jeez, we spent total like 2 hours on this API.
Oh, not 2 hours. Like we did a bunch of other stuff.
2 hours for this review.
No, that one was
the other
probably
two
one.
reviews
No,
we had.
that one was 1 hour.
Right.
Oh shoot, it's no.
So we're done. So the other two things were not ready for review anyway, so it's good. Alright guys, thanks so much. Bye bye.